Hi, everyone. We're just going to give people a couple minutes to come into the Zoom room, and then we will get started at noon Mountain Time sharp. Hello, everybody. My name is Jen Kavexis. I am the Assistant Director for Programs here at the Salazar Center for North American Conservation. Welcome to our second installment of our Urban Stories webinar series. I would like to acknowledge before we begin that I am on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other Native tribes. I recognize the Indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. I'm so excited to be here today with you all and to have this fabulous lineup of speakers and moderators with you today. We are going to focus on conserving water in arid cities. But before I introduce our moderator and launch into that discussion, I just wanted to touch base on a few housekeeping things for our webinar today. So first, I just wanted to apologize a little bit. We were supposed to have a Spanish interpretation today for this webinar, but our interpreter had a last-minute emergency and could not be with us here today. So I apologize for any of our Spanish-speaking attendees, but we will have a recording of this with Spanish language captions available afterwards. If you have questions, and we definitely encourage you to be part of this conversation and submit questions, but we'd ask that you use the chat, not the Q&A feature. So put your questions in the chat. You don't have to wait until the speakers are done. You can put them in as we go. I've already alluded to this, but the session is being recorded and we will share it with all of the attendees and registrants after the event. And of course, we welcome you to learn more about the Salazar Center at our website and our various social media feeds. I also wanted to remind people, I've already said this is our second installment in this webinar series today. So our third installment will be in January, on January 18th. And we'll be featuring experts from Mexico, US, and Canada to talk about how cities link to the larger landscapes and how that can play a role, how cities can play a role in meeting national conservation targets and what are some innovative programs different cities are looking at for that. So with that, I would like to introduce our fabulous moderator for the day. Today we have Alex Hager, who is a KUNC, which is one of our local NPR affiliates, reporter. He focuses on the Colorado River Basin. He will be our moderator for today. And with that, I will pass the virtual mic over to Alex to introduce our guests for the day. Thank you.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you everywhere else. I am really excited to be here and be speaking with some really interesting speakers today. We're going to be talking about issues that are posing a major threat to folks in the area that I cover. I travel the entire Colorado River Basin from Wyoming to Mexico, and there are big questions about the future of a river that supplies 40 million people. And after 23 years of drought and some stagnation on the policy side to reallocate water accordingly, challenges for agriculture and cities and indigenous tribes and everyone in between. And today I'm hoping to zoom in a little bit on how that plays out in cities, not only here in the Southwest, but using some of the things that we've talked about in the Southwest of the United States and translating those lessons to climate solutions and water solutions in other parts of the country. The first speaker that we have today is Eileen Alduenda. She is the Executive Director of the Council for Watershed Health, and she is trained as a landscape architect with an interest in urban ecology. And we're also joined by Zane Marshall, who is the Director of Water Resources for the Southern Nevada Water Authority, which provides Las Vegas. And he's worked there for the last 27 years, and he is a Las Vegas native himself. Why don't we start by hearing from Zane?
Great. Thank you, Alex. And thanks to the Salazar Center and the folks that are watching today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. First, I'd like to say that if there's anything positive that I say today, it's the result of collaboration across our organization and our community and even the region, and the results of dedicated staff and community leaders within our area. I also want to recognize that each watershed and community is unique. So I'm going to tell you our story, but the challenges and opportunities that each community has might be a little bit different, or they might be able to take something from what I say and apply it to their unique circumstance. So we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. I have a few slides here that I'll go through. So the Southern Nevada Water Authority was formed in 1991. It's a cooperative agency with 7 member agencies here in the Las Vegas Valley that include both water and wastewater agencies. We serve a population of 2.4 million people and 42 million annual visitors. And we get 4 inches of rain per year. So we're the most arid metropolitan area in North America. And the other functions that we provide include the construction and operation of regional water infrastructure, long-range resource planning. We develop and finalize a 50-year water resource plan every year and put that to our board for their approval. We conduct water banking and active water resource management, and then obviously conservation, which will be the focus of my presentation today. So our water supply includes 90% Colorado River from Lake Mead and 10% from our local aquifer. Nevada is 1.8% of the total water allocated on the Colorado River among the 7 basin states and the country of Mexico. And currently we're about 1.6% of basin demands. Our hydrology is such that everything that we use indoors and that goes into the sanitary sewer is treated by wastewater treatment plants. It's discharged back to Lake Mead, the Colorado River system, and we get a return flow credit, so we can reuse that water. That ability to reuse or recycle our indoor uses extends our water supply by 75%. And it is the reason why we focus on outdoor consumptive uses. So those uses include irrigation, landscape irrigation, evaporation off of pools and water features, evaporative cooling in the valley. And then we also have some customers that have septic tanks. And so any water that goes into septic tanks dead ends there. So again, our conservation programs are really focused on those consumptive, mostly outdoor uses. This slide here just shows that over the past 22 years or so, the Colorado River Basin has been in drought. The graphic on the left is natural inflows into the basin, and the black line is the average since 1906. And as you can see, the last 22 years, many of the last 22 years have been below the average, and the flows are in the last 20 years are averaging closer to 12 million acre feet, with demands and system losses at close to 15 million acre feet. So there is an obvious deficit in the system, which has resulted in the decline of both Lakes Powell and Lake Mead. And the graphic on the right shows the projected elevations for Lake Mead. And so the Bureau of Reclamation does a 24-month projection, and they have a minimum, a maximum, and a most probable projection in the red, blue, and green lines there. And the story there is just that in the short term, we expect Lake Mead to continue to decline. And the long-term projection is that things are not necessarily going to get better, that we are experiencing permanent aridification in the Colorado River Basin due to increasing temperatures. And as a basin community, we need to learn to live with less water. So in 2002 is when the basin really received the least amount of water in recorded history. We had about 25% of normal runoff. And in 2003, the Water Authority started an intensive planning process. In 2004, we adopted a drought plan, which included an extensive conservation program that had 4 tiers. And those 4 tiers are education, incentives, regulation, and pricing. And so, for example, in education, we developed the demonstration gardens, that we have educational programs and significant public outreach in our community. Incentives, some folks may have heard of the Water Smart Landscaping Program. Today, we pay customers $3 per square foot for the first 10,000 square feet and $1.50 after that to remove turf and to replace it with Water Smart Landscaping. We have instituted regulations, and in the early 2000s, we added development codes. For example, in single-family residence, we disallowed turf in front yards, and only 50% of backyards could be in turf. And we put golf courses on budgets. And then pricing, we have a 4-tier pricing rate here among the water agencies within the SNWA distribution area. So that's what we did in early 2000s. And the result of that in the past 20 years is, even with a population increase in the valley of 49%, we were able to reduce our per capita use by 48% and our overall Colorado River consumption by 26%. So I want to point out that in 2002, Southern Nevada was using 30,000 acre feet over its allocation of 300,000 acre feet on the Colorado River. So we were essentially out of water in 2002. And because of that, today we're well below our allocation at about 242,000 acre feet. This obviously didn't come without costs. We've invested over $200 million in our conservation programs since 2002, and it's, again, it's been an overall community effort, and again, this success of reducing our consumptive use and per capita use is the result of a lot of community cooperation, community leadership, and customers willing to sometimes do hard things. But our population continues to grow. The graphic on the left shows new connections within the Las Vegas Valley Water District service area. It's cumulative, but if I can call your attention to the month of December, you can see how new connections from 2016 through 2021 accelerated from one year to the next. We thought the pandemic would actually slow growth down, and apparently it did just the opposite. And the graphic on the right is the population projection that the Center for Business and Economic Research produces, that we use to make for our demand model. And you can see there, from 2020 to 2021, they adjusted the projection by nearly 200,000 people over the projection period. So more growth, and again, we expect the Colorado River to produce less water over the long term due to aridification. And this is just a visual of the results, with Lake Mead today at about 27% of capacity, and Lake Powell is no better. It's important to point out here, as the reservoirs get to these levels, it's not only the reduction in volume, but we're producing critical elevations where both of the generating facilities at these reservoirs will no longer be able to produce power. At Lake Powell, it's 3490, elevation 3490, and at Lake Mead, it's elevation 950, and at 900, Hoover Dam or Lake Mead is unable to release water downstream to California, Arizona, and Mexico. So the Bureau of Reclamation is laser focused today on protecting those critical elevations, both for power generating capacity and obviously being able to release water downstream. So in 2021, the Water Authority doubled our efforts in conservation. We underwent an integrated resource planning advisory committee process and an internal planning process to identify additional conservation measures. And in our previous resource plan, we had a goal of 105 gallons per capita per day by 2035. And in last year's planning process, we revised that goal down to 86 gallons per capita per day by 2035 to meet our community's demands. And I'll show you in a minute how that reflects for our future projections. But some of the major components of that new resource plan in 2021 included additional landscape irrigation efficiencies, removal of septic tanks in the community, a focus on evaporative cooling, a new effort to address industrial high industrial uses or commercial uses like bottling plants or export products, and also water features and pools in the valley. This graphic here is a step-down chart that shows 14 strategies that are in our resource plan that was approved in 2021. And this is the road really for us to get to 86 GPCD. And if I can just call out a couple items in the middle there, there is the implement AB 356. That is a new state law that we got enacted last year that precludes the use of Colorado River water to irrigate non-functional turf in the Las Vegas Valley, and by January 1, 2027. So we have 5 years to remove around 2,000 acres of non-functional turf in the valley, and it will result in significant savings in terms of water consumption. We have prohibited new golf courses in the valley. We're going to put them on a reduced water budget from 6.3 acre feet per acre to 4 acre feet per acre. We've also precluded new development turf in all applications other than parks, schools, and cemeteries. So those are just a few examples. We're adjusting our tiered pricing to penalize excessive use, particularly in the wintertime. We're working with parks to increase their efficiencies and convert from cool season grass to warm season grass. So those are just a few of the strategies. We can get into more detail if folks want to later. And then finally, this is what that does for us. So in our resource plan, we use a scenario planning approach. This is an 11 million acre foot scenario. And I said earlier that the basin is an average inflows are about 12 million acre feet. Demands are almost 15 million acre feet. So this is close to what we've been experiencing in the basin for the past 20 years. And then we have 3 different demand scenarios under that inflow scenario. And from left to right, we have a better scenario and then worst case scenario on the right. And you can see how, so the red line is our demands. The dark blue block is Colorado River supplies and groundwater. And then we have light blue is a reuse facility project we have arrangement with Metropolitan. We have temporary supplies, and then there's the brown is our future resources. So the goal is to really push out the need to utilize our temporary supplies or develop future resources. And that is what we're doing with changing the goal and implementing conservation in our community, is ensuring that we can meet our demands even when we have shortage conditions on the river, which reduces our allocation, and accommodate some level of growth in the community by being more efficient. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Zane, thanks so much for that. I really appreciate your insight. And I will say, you don't have to just take it from me. I can say completely unbiased as a journalist that talking to water experts around the basin in city governments and water departments, and also independent experts and academics, the SNWA in Nevada is seen as one of the real leaders in urban water conservation. And I think a lot of people are keeping their eyes on Southern Nevada as a place to take lessons for water conservation in some of the driest parts of the country. And another dry part of the country that has taken some major strides is a little further south, and we're going to hear a little bit more from down there right now. I'm going to introduce Eileen Alduenda. Again, she is the Executive Director of the Council for Watershed Health, and she is trained as a landscape architect with an interest in urban ecology. For some lessons from Southern California, I would love to hear from Eileen.
Thank you, Alex. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm gonna go with that. Great. It's great to be here. I'm gonna take a cue that everyone can see the screen. So I am the Executive Director of the Council for Watershed Health. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting us. And yes, we rely on Colorado River water for part of our water supply. And I'm excited to share with you today a little bit about the council, how we look at managing our water resources in collaboration with agencies, our community organizations, and other nonprofits. And I'd like to start off just by sharing with you our mission, which, let's see, here we go, which is to advance the health and sustainability of our region's watersheds, rivers, and habitats, both in natural areas and urban neighborhoods. And we do this through science-based research, education, and inclusive engagement. We were founded 25 years ago by Dorothy Green, who really recognized the need to bring together the agencies to really think about our water resources and looking at ways of reducing localized flooding, increasing our water supply, reducing the reliance on imported water, like that is coming from the Colorado River as part of that, and improve the water quality of runoff that is moving from our streets and storm drains to our rivers and oceans, and look for ways of increasing biodiversity. And many of the water agencies that she first had conversations with have continued to be our partner agencies, partnering on projects and education, and are also on our board. Those conversations led to a demonstration project that we have learned a lot from. It is the Green Infrastructure Project Elmer Avenue that really helped us understand how agencies, nonprofit organizations in the community can work together to really look at stormwater runoff as a resource that can help, again, augment our local water supplies and have those other benefits that I mentioned before. And in Elmer Avenue, we focused in on an area of the LA region that lacks a modern storm drain system. There is one, but many of the neighborhoods lack a storm drain system and end up having that localized flooding. They also tend to be underserved, where there's not very many resources over the years kind of going to those neighborhoods and those communities. And it tends to be the area where there is the highest infiltration rates for our local water supply basins. So Elmer Avenue is in the Sun Valley area of, it's north of downtown LA. And it's a neighborhood that needed a lot of resources. You can see in the picture up to the left, it lacked the curbs and gutters that a lot of neighborhoods have. And through the collaboration of a number of water agencies that represent water supply, flooding, wastewater, street services, the city of LA, the LA County, came together, and the council's role was to coordinate that effort to manage the multiple number of agencies and resources coming together that then looked at ways of redesigning a neighborhood street to capture, clean, and infiltrate the runoff. So what you see here is sort of some of the after pictures that are the result of redesigning a street to capture water under subsurface via 2 infiltration galleries. The public right-of-way has curbs and gutters and inlets that direct runoff from the street to bioswales, sidewalks that are now allowing residents to walk safely and comfortably, and then improvements to residential sites. And after 10 years, it's still, Elmer Avenue is still capturing, cleaning, and infiltrating stormwater. Elmer Paseo is the, oh, I'm missing a slide here. Darn. Anyways, you can see Elmer Paseo is a small alley that is south of Elmer Avenue. It's connected and was part of the neighborhood retrofit. It too was kind of a deteriorated and underutilized space, and is now one where water is captured in a swale that leads to an infiltration gallery. It provides passage to for students going to and from school through the neighborhood, and it has been kind of a gathering space for the neighborhood as for the residents as well. There was a lot of community education and engagement that happened with both of these projects together and separately. The agencies took a real interest in learning what would work. It ended up being almost like a living, it is a living laboratory, trying out a lot of different techniques and strategies that have now influenced and helped to inform current projects or projects that followed Elmer Avenue. A number of the lessons learned have helped to improve the design of our streetscapes, our green alleys, and have been applicable to park design as well. So some of the lessons learned from Elmer in terms of, in addition to new designs for streets and parks and neighborhoods, is that it helped to break down some silos within the agencies that were working together. And those silos, there's always going to be some siloing, but those have certainly been reduced. And I'll share with you some ways that agencies are continuing to partner together, especially those that started out collaborating on Elmer Avenue. And then we also understood much more about residents and community involvement in these projects and how much value their experience and their priorities mean to the success of a project. Paying attention and listening and learning from what their priorities are really help us to understand how to have successful projects be designed that meet their needs as well as the agency goals. And then the role of the nonprofit really is important to these projects. The we as the manager of Elmer Avenue, Elmer Paseo, learned a lot about how to kind of understand and help meet the goals of the agencies as well as the community and be that bridge between them. We also had access to funding that agencies necessarily wouldn't have been able to move on. And then we're also in a position to move really quickly. And that results in a successful project. Oh, there's the result. And again, we continue to use Elmer Avenue, Elmer Paseo as a demonstration site, taking a number of different agencies, students, representatives from other municipalities on tours here. When we focus in on the community benefits of green infrastructure, we also understand, excuse me, we also understand that there's a connection to water that is a priority for communities. And we look for those opportunities in which communities are leading their own projects to make those connections. And then we look for opportunities to integrate green stormwater infrastructure into their projects. So when we find out about, or we learn about a community that's interested in doing a park in their neighborhood, we're also looking at ways of managing the stormwater on that space. Active transportation is of real keen interest here in the Southern California area, in the LA area. And there's ways that we've been looking at partnering and moving and integrating stormwater management into bike lanes and bike paths and greenways, as an example. Let's see if I can move the next slide. So through our Redesign LA program, we've been building the capacity of community-based organizations to lead green infrastructure projects and to partner with agencies on these projects. It's one model that we recognize that is important to ensuring that community engagement happens all the way through projects, and then can be a resource and a valuable partner on these projects. The mentor-mentee model allows the community-based organizations to learn from each other and to partner with agencies. And we feel really strongly that having the CBO lead the projects in their communities results in a more successful project. So the engagement is important, as I mentioned. When CBOs lead projects, they're in the best position to ensure the engagement is happening in the way that is appropriate for their communities. A shout out to the Salazar Center for its support of our Redesign LA program. And these are just, this map shows the LA River watershed and the region in which we are working with a number of community-based organizations that are doing projects that are now incorporating stormwater management. Again, we feel that the communities are in the best position to be advocates for projects. We know that there are projects that are going to be coming down that will be funded through the bipartisan funding source, and it's going to be important to have those community-based organizations involved in those processes. So Redesign LA is one way that we're helping to build the capacity of them to be part of that. Another way that they'll be important is on projects related to recycled water. As Zane had mentioned, Colorado River is certainly significantly reduced in the amount of water that it's providing. And as I mentioned, that is one water resource for us here in LA. A number of our partner agencies have been looking at recycled water and have plans to do recycled water projects. The LA County Sanitation Districts is partnering with Metropolitan Water District. LA Sanitation and LA Department of Water and Power of the City of LA are partnering together, both on individual projects. Our role as a nonprofit is to convene them and help to better understand their communication to communities and help to bring resources and information to their process. So we know that, again, communities are going to be important to any of these projects, and involving them in the beginning as soon as possible is going to help to make for more successful projects. Happy to talk to you about more of any of those other projects. And I think I'll end on just a couple of things that we've learned that individuals can do. That in addition to being part of the community, everyone can do something in their front yard or backyard. Every year we put out a calendar of sustainable landscaping tips that kind of reinforce those things that we can all do, such as think about and look at those opportunities to install a gray water system, at least harvest the rain and put that water to beneficial use. Kind of reinforcing Zane's point about reducing and removing unfunctional grass. We know that that's kind of a big opportunity here in LA, and replace that with native plants. So I'll end there. Thank you very much, and look forward to having a conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I really appreciate your insight on that matter. And I want to kick things off in our discussion portion here by zooming out and putting this into context. And this is maybe a little bit of a cynical question, but wouldn't be a good journalist if I wasn't bringing a little bit of cynicism to the table. When we're looking at water use in some of the driest parts of the country, agriculture is often using a really big slice of the pie, and that is no exception in the parts of the country we're talking about, in the lower Colorado River Basin. In the Colorado River Basin as a whole, 70 to 80% of all of that water use is on farms and ranches. So that in mind, what's the role of water conservation in cities? If you're living in a city and hearing this, or you are working for a city and hearing this, is there there any reason to feel like household water conservation or even city water conservation is actually helping to make a difference?
Yeah, I can go ahead and take a swag at that. Absolutely. Any water saved is water that's made available. The water resource is made available for some other use. And certainly, as we think about how we're using water in the outdoor landscape, here in the urban landscape, it would make sense to put that water to a beneficial use, like nurture, irrigating trees that are providing shade as well as fruit. So that's, there's a keen interest in urban agriculture, community gardens, urban forestry. Certainly are opportunities to kind of really think about how we use that water, and make sure that we're using it wisely here, so that more water that the water that we're not using from other areas is made available for that agriculture. I'll pause there. See if Zane has anything to add.
Thanks, Eileen, and thanks, Alex. So I mentioned in my presentation that Nevada uses 1.6% of total demands in the Colorado River Basin. So we as a single entity we're not going to be able to fix the problem in terms of the deficit for what's coming into the basin and what's being utilized, with agriculture being 75 to 80% of total demands. But we can set an example for others, and we need to adapt to these changing, more arid conditions within the basin, and become more resilient to those different changes. And if we want to continue to be a viable, livable community that has some economic growth, we need to be more efficient in the way that we use our limited water resources. And we've been faced with aridification or with water scarcity, really, from the very beginning, and so it's part of our culture. With climate change, there are communities around the country that are faced with extensive droughts or more intensive droughts, with warming that may not be used to this circumstance. But climate change is coming to a neighborhood near you, and it's a good thing to go through and evaluate demands and uses of a resource that can impact the community pretty quickly if you're not prepared to deal with it. And I just say, in terms of the Colorado River Basin, it's going to take all of us, all sectors, all communities, to reevaluate how we use our water, become more efficient, to be able to adapt to these changing conditions.
I think Eileen and Zane are both excellent examples of ways that arid cities are already adapting to some of these challenges and curveballs being thrown by climate change. And like Zane mentioned earlier, there has been a great ability to stretch out water use. You're seeing cities in the Colorado River Basin using the same total amount of water, even as they're growing by hundreds of thousands of people. And a lot of those conservation methods are pretty visible. They're kind of the first thing that comes to mind. The grassy lawn replacement and low flow shower heads and toilets and rainwater collection. But I wanted to ask you both, what do you see as the biggest areas for improvement? I mean, what's kind of the next frontier for urban water conservation?
Go ahead, Eileen, if you'd like.
Well, so we know that there's been a lot of strides made towards reducing the indoor water use. So often we look at outdoor water use, which is typically where we focus our time, our effort. And I'll go back to the scaling up of the green stormwater infrastructure is going to be a key aspect. In addition to the recycled water programs and projects that are kind of that are in the planning and design stages. Those won't be online for a number of years. So what is it that we need to be doing now immediately to be preparing for the changes that we know will be coming? The green infrastructure is one tool in the toolbox, and the scaling up of these projects in our communities throughout each of the neighborhoods is going to be key. they complement those larger projects. They focus in on some immediate benefits that communities are looking for. So you get a multiple benefit. And as we think about the aging infrastructure of our water system right now, that is stormwater managing, these become an important tool and an important strategy for us. It also ties in with what you were talking about earlier about the agricultural piece, because one of the key components of making sure that we have efficient water use for agriculture, as well as in our urban neighborhoods, is the soil health. And when we look at what makes a green infrastructure project successful, it's that relationship between soil, water, and plants. And it's that choice of plant material that's going to be key to that water conservation. And so when we can, thinking about the right plant in the right place, and starting with the trees, the planting of trees throughout our communities is going to help to reduce the urban heat island effect and the creating microclimates. Granted, trees will take a number of years to grow, but it's an investment that's important, and paired with ready for that rain, ready for that storm water to come, will be important. And there's some really great examples around the country of how that's worked before. I'll pause there.
Zane, we can't quite hear you right now. I'm not sure if you're muted or. Can you not hear you now? Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. So we have been focused on outdoor irrigation and landscaping mostly for the past 20 years. Has been a major focus, compliance and codes also. Our work now is we're starting to move towards building codes, more efficiency in building.
We lost you, Zane. You just, I think, might have hit mute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, so right now we're starting to pivot to efficiencies in evaporative cooling. So obviously that's cooling in large buildings and casinos and storage facilities is a major use. It's our second highest demand in the community. And we are pushing codes to eliminate evaporative cooling and drive for more efficiencies in building construction to make those facilities more efficient for cooling. We're also implementing automated metering infrastructure, or AMI, which allows us to have near real-time information from our customers' meters and allows us to push out notifications to them if they have leaks or if they're violating the watering rules. And we can apply artificial intelligence tools to the data generated from those meters to identify when folks have leaks. And so that's another area we're very interested in. And then finally, working with the planning departments within the municipal jurisdictions. In the past, we've really just been about accommodating growth, where we actually need to be at the table and working with the planners and the economic development staff in the community to ensure that we're growing in a way that can be supported by the resources that we have.
All righty, thanks, Eileen and Zane. I've got one more question for the two of you, and then we're going to pivot to questions from the audience. So if you are listening and something's coming to mind, feel free to pop that in the chat. So this last question for both of you, in cities like Las Vegas and Los Angeles, water conservation is very necessary, but I want to look at some of the lessons you've learned there that could be translated to other cities in different climates. We maybe have a changing definition of arid over time, and we are seeing a lot of cities that are maybe just now coming to grips with the idea of larger scale water conservation. So if you are in a city that is just now starting to think seriously or invest more into water conservation programs, what are some of the lessons that they can learn from your part of the country that could be translated?
Dan, you want to go first?
Sure. So, for us, it's been, a 20+ year journey in implementing conservation in our community. And so we take an adaptive management approach. We get community input early on. We use an integrated planning advisory committee process where we have community representatives that are educated about our water situation and provide guidance and recommendations to our board of directors. I think that process has been really, really helpful to get that community input and advice to our board. And we've made some mistakes, and we need to, you have to just kind of roll with it and adjust as you identify better ways to accomplish your goals. It's again, conservation is a journey. I would also say that, science, using science, applying science, and being upfront about your situation is really important. Don't hide the facts. If you've got concern about where your community is going and the water supply that it has, folks need to speak up. Agencies need to be upfront with their boards and their elected officials about what their situation is and what their concerns are, and then plan around dealing with those problems. Thank you.
In terms of transferability, we've learned a lot from others around the country. At least, again, I'm going to kind of focus it on the green infrastructure. And a lot of that comes from understanding, again, how to be prepared for that rain when it comes. One of the most recent efforts, I think that will be an important tool to think about is how do you fund these projects? How do you fund the community-based or the community-led projects? And Los Angeles County recently, the voters of Los Angeles County recently passed, it's been a couple of years now, Measure W, the Safe Clean Water Program. And when I have a minute, I'll grab the link and put it in the chat. And I seen a couple of questions I think this will help to answer. That, we recognize that we need more of these projects. We need them connected hydrologically. We need them connected geographically within communities, socially, culturally, and one opportunity I think that we've had with Measure W is to better understand sort of how do these projects get funded, the larger projects as well as these community-led projects, and the collaboration and the coordination that needs to happen on these projects. So I think some of the lessons learned that we have to share are how that collaboration has worked. What does it look like when a municipality is moving forward on a project and is needing to ensure that the community is aware and engaged in that? And that's, again, I'm going to go back to our Redesign LA program. Is that being a good model for where engagement needs to happen in those programs and projects? And certainly, how do we get more of those partnerships happening between the agencies and the communities on these projects? I mean, it sounds like Zane's had some good success there with projects and keeping folks informed. And I know there's others around the country and even in our area where that's happening. So I think kind of sharing those lessons learned in terms of how to collaborate on these projects, partnering on the projects are going to be a really important next step for making sure that we're all prepared for we're getting these projects built in much quicker than we're going to be able to kind of respond to the storm events that are coming our way, and design in such a way that we're getting those multiple benefits from these projects. I think is where the opportunity lies for all of us.
All righty, now we're going to take some questions from the folks listening. First one is for Zane. What have been some of the keys to SNWA's success in getting customers to buy into conservation? And this is one that I am very curious to hear the answer about.
So I think education is very important. We have, as I mentioned earlier, extensive public outreach programs, advertising, those kinds of things, to enforce with our community that, or to let them know that they live in a desert. We need to live as if we live in a desert, and that we're experiencing, long-term declines in our primary water supply. That certainly helps, just the education piece. The other is our rebates and incentive programs. So we are using financial incentives to bring our customers along with participating in our conservation programs. The tiered water rates that our community has also help to incentivize or disincentivize, high usage, and that helps as well. I can say with our new effort in conservation, we're doing some hard things, and we are having impacts on certain business sectors, and that has required a lot of time and effort, just sitting down with folks and in small groups or one-on-one, conversations to explain to them, show the data, present scientific data or research to justify or explain our actions. All of that is part of this kind of community engagement that has helped to bring our community along. We've had very good leadership also with our elected officials, and they are on board with our programs. They understand the challenges. They also understand that if we're not successful in implementing our conservation programs, what the downside is, right? Which is economic impacts to our community and reduced resiliency to potential shortages or cuts in the Colorado River. So,
thank you, Zane. And now a question. Oh, go ahead,
Alex. If I could just say, we are unforgivingly honest with our elected officials in our community, right? So, and our general manager, our executive team has also said that that's, we are going to be bold, and our community is going to understand our circumstance, whether it's good news or bad news.
Thank you, Zane. Question for Eileen. How are the habitants responding to the biodiversity of the gardens from green infrastructure?
Yeah, it's an important question. So the city of LA has adopted a biodiversity index. The county of LA has a sustainability plan, and there's a keen interest on increasing the biodiversity, which would come from our selection of plant material for our landscapes, which would then reflect back on the native plants. And there are a number of opportunities to incorporate those native plants into projects. And so the response has been encouraging, recognizing that not every situation will allow for a full native plant palette. On Elmer Avenue and on Elmer Paseo, I can speak from our experience that with the native plant palette to increase diversity, that certainly helped and was well received by the residents. They wanted something that would be, not take a lot of water, not take a lot of maintenance, and would withstand sort of those extremes of drought and that inundation. And so we had decent success. It all comes back to, some of that maintenance and when that water comes, and then that supplemental irrigation to kind of get them established in that time period. So there are, I think that's specific to Elmer Avenue and Elmer Paseo, we needed to establish and redo planting in Elmer Paseo recently. We had a number of the original trees and vines withstand a lot of the drought conditions, and then we replanted. So I am going to say that biodiversity was well received initially. Everyone wanted to see it continue on. A number of the park projects in LA, a number of the street projects, they're all integrating native plants that help increase that biodiversity. And I think that's there's a nice reflection on a number of nonprofit organizations that have been promoting native plants and the biodiversity that comes with that throughout LA. Happy to share those resources with anyone that's interested.
All right, another question from the audience coming up. This one is for whoever wants to answer it. They said, playing devil's advocate again, I know there are concerns about arid regions in which turf removal could increase energy needs in the urban heat island effect. Can you speak to solutions here?
I think Zane's trying to take that. I can't hear him.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so we've had this question, obviously with AB 356 and the removal of turf in the community. Urban heat island effect is certainly a concern. Las Vegas is one of the fastest heating urban areas in North America. We were just talking earlier before the webinar, our high temperatures 117 degrees in June and July. So it's certainly a concern. But turf is a very small percentage of the total developed area within our community. And if you use turf, we have turf where we're using it within those microclimate areas like ball fields or parks or play areas for children in schools, it makes a difference. If we're talking about turf along roadways, that turf is doing nothing to affect urban heat island or to cool the urban heat island when there is a 100-foot wide roadway right next to it. That is the problem, right? So the hard impermeable surfaces in the community are really what's driving urban heat island. And so having more shade, whether it's engineered shade or more trees, is a reasonable approach to addressing urban heat island impact. And modifying our built environment so that it's built to make it cooler, right? And so that's white roofs, or it is maybe lighter colored infrastructure. And so you get my point that our turfed area in our community is less than 1% total of the total developed surface area in the community. So having turf where it makes sense, where it's important for those microclimates where people are using the turf, it makes sense. But if the person that pushes the lawnmower is the only person that's walking on that turf, it doesn't make any sense to have it there. And it's really not having much of an impact on the overall urban heat island impact. That's my perspective on the issue.
Since we are nearing the end of the hour, I'd like to move on to the next question. I'm happy to give Eileen the opportunity to answer first. But I want to close out with one of my own questions here, and that's sort of a big picture one. Are we going to be able to figure this out in time? Climate change is very rapidly shifting our availability to water, and we are seeing governments respond with sort of a very different pace in some instances. So do you feel that governments and utilities departments have their planning lined up and have the money coming in that they need to keep taps flowing in cities, arid cities across the country?
Go ahead, Eileen.
Alex, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, no problem.
My sound was going in and out and I couldn't figure it out for a minute.
No problem. Do you feel like governments and utilities departments have the planning lined up and have the money that they need to keep the taps flowing as we go into the future here?
So I'm going to go back to that Measure W funding source for us in California, at least in Los Angeles. So there has been voter approved funding source that is an annual funding source. There are projects that have been in the works for a number of years and on the shelves and now coming off the shelves that agencies are leading. And we're wanting to make sure, I think the key here is we're wanting to make sure that there are benefits going to the communities for these projects that are being funded. So that is where, again, those community-led or community-partnered green infrastructure projects are kind of starting to get into the pipeline and will get funded. There's a lot more that's needed, and the funding needs to be augmented by other funding sources. So yes, I think agencies have been planning for projects, communities have been planning for their own projects, but they need to be incorporating stormwater management in order to access those funds, and they need support, either technical assistance, which we know is needed, by both community-based organizations, small municipalities, and even school districts who may or may not have that technical expertise or that technical capacity. And the funding through Measure W allows for some support of that, and then others are looking at that in terms of partnerships with other organizations like ourselves or other entities out there. So I think we're not quite there yet, but I think we're kind of moving in that direction to be ready for more resilient projects going in.
Zane, we got 3 minutes left on the clock. Now's your chance.
So I think it depends on the community, right, across the basin and where they're at on this in this journey. There is a significant amount of funding that's available, particularly through federal grant processes like the Water Smart Grant Program that the Bureau of Reclamation has to implement conservation programs. To obtain those grants, that requires resources. But I think cities are going in the right direction in the arid Southwest and in the Colorado River Basin. We recently had an MOU that was signed on November 14th by 30 water utilities across the Colorado River Basin to commit to certain conservation initiatives. And I think it starts with a commitment, and I would just warn other utilities or folks that work in utilities that it's kind of, you either pay now or you pay later, right? And it may be much more impactful in terms of the impacts of climate change, aridification, drought on your community if you pay later. So it's really, in my opinion, the best idea to get your heads and your resources wrapped around solutions for becoming more efficient and addressing these challenges now rather than waiting for them to become emergencies.
All right. Well, Zane and Eileen, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you to the Salazar Center for hosting. The organizers have put the emails for all three of us in the chat. So if you have any follow-up questions, do not hesitate to reach out individually. Looks like Zane and Eileen also both put in links to some of their work as well. I'm going to pop a link to KUNC's water reporting. I'd encourage you to go there, check out some features that we've had from around the basin on the science and policy that has really defined life in the arid Southwest. So thanks so much to everyone involved, and I hope we all learned a little bit and enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.